to bring in Dr. Barbara Perry, professor and director of presidential studies at the University of Virginia. Great to see you. I always love picking your brain on some of the historical elements of these big speeches. It is in the Constitution that the president must address Congress, but how did the State of the Union go from essentially a written summary to this prime time speech addressing the nation?
Sure. Well, great to be with you as always. And yes, it starts really with George Washington making an in-person appearance to give this what we now call State of the Union address. And you're right, it is required in the Constitution that it says from time to time the president will provide, in effect, updates to the Congress on proposals and potential legislation. So George Washington is not only the first president, he's the first to deliver it in person. But Thomas Jefferson, the founder of University of Virginia right here in Charlottesville, Virginia, said that's too monarchical. It's like when we used to see, in our case, Queen Elizabeth go with all the pomp and circumstance and sort of sit on the throne in the Parliament and give an address. So Thomas Jefferson started, I don't want to say mailing it in, but he started sending the written report. It's not until 1913 that Woodrow Wilson, I would point out the only PhD political scientist president, decided that it would be best to give it in person. And he had this belief in what he called the rhetorical presidency, that if he could talk to people, talk to Congress, talk to the American people directly, he could lead them more effectively.
Well, there are always moments that we'll be talking about tomorrow that will happen in tonight's speech, a couple that people may remember from 2 years ago. It feels longer than 2 years ago, but we saw then President Trump avoid shaking Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi's hand. Then she tore up the speech as the American people watched as she was sitting behind him. Do you see any political fireworks or snubs happening tonight?
Oh, I wouldn't doubt that there will be some. Let us hope it is not quite so obvious, the sort of a kindergarten moment there that happened between two officials. But given that there's a new Speaker of the House from a different party from the president, and given that that party now has the majority, even if a narrow one, in the House of Representatives, I'm sure there will be people acting out. Again, I hope it's not up on the podium or the dais, but certainly out in the crowd. I suspect there will be some memorable moments and perhaps not the best angels of our nature in American history.
Right. People will be people, as they say. So the president is considering a 2024 re-election to run again for president. There are some new poll numbers out suggesting that he may not have full support from Democrats to do so. Do you expect that he will address that at all in tonight's speech?
I doubt that. I doubt that he will use this as the opportunity to announce that he's running, although never say never. But I think instead what he needs to do, because most of the people who are in his own party are preferring that perhaps someone else run at the top of the ticket in 2024, are concerned, and rightly so, about his age and perhaps health status. So I think what he needs to be able to do is come in strongly. I, as a political scientist, look at the moment when the president enters the chamber as sort of the Oscars red carpet moment, and he needs to make that strong. He needs to look well and healthy and be shaking hands and smiling, and then give a good, strong speech without fumbling or bumbling about. And if he can do that and leave the chamber, again, a red carpet moment, in a way that he looks enthused and infused with energy, that would be one of the best ways to try to counter this view that he's too decrepit to run in 2024.
Another thing that's interesting, Dr. Perry, a source telling NewsNation former President Trump is planning a rapid response operation in real time during President Biden's speech tonight. How unusual would that be?
That is not unusual for Donald Trump, shall we say, but it would be unusual for a former president to engage in that. Most presidents have actually become friends as they exit the White House. In this case, as he exited the White House, he wasn't there for the inauguration of his successor, Joe Biden. So most presidents have formed what we call the President's Club, even if they were mortal enemies, if one defeated the other. In the case of Bill Clinton, for example, defeating George Bush the first, and yet they became good friends and colleagues in their post-presidency because it's a small club, and they usually draw together and try to support each other, or at the very least not criticize each other, because they know that that's not good for the country and it's not good for our image abroad.
Finally, much is made of the guests that will be in the audience, those who are personally invited by the president or the first lady. Why is that so important, and what will you be watching for?
That's a tradition that goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan in 1982. And if any president knew how to take the stage and make a splash, it was the ex-Hollywood actor Ronald Reagan. And he brought in a hero who had jumped into the icy Potomac that January to save people who had been involved in a plane crash into the Potomac River. The man's name was Lenny Skutnik. And so we call those who will come forward tonight, we call them Lenny Skutniks in honor of him. And they're usually people who are heroic themselves, or they have encountered some terrible tragedy that they are trying to find their way through and persevere. And so it makes us feel good as a country. And we hope that that's the kind of thing that can bring the parties together and heal some of our divisions.
Always a fascinating history lesson. Dr. Barbara Perry, professor and director of presidential studies at University of Virginia. Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.